The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
The 45th anniversary of the Miracle on Ice, the greatest sports upset of all time, was Saturday. But the impact of the Miracle on Ice is not felt if not for what happened 45 years ago today. The win over Finland made that what it is today, as we're now 5 years away from the 50th anniversary of one of the most incredible moments in the history of sports, if not the most incredible moment. We'll spend a lot of time on that today. Alex Ovechkin. Oh, man. 39 years old. Did you expect this? I don't think too many people did. We'll spend a lot of time on what he did yesterday and what's ahead because I would say if you're Wayne Gretzky, you better check your travel schedule for the next month or so. I mean, it's going to be maybe a few weeks before he really has to look at this seriously. But Alex Ovechkin now 13 away from breaking the record with now the projected date of April 4th. Who would have thought that at the beginning of the season? But the Caps are scoring goals by the bucket, and Ovechkin yesterday added to the legend of what has already been an unbelievable career. By the way, my voice a little bit scratchy today. There's a lot to yell about in the world right now. That's not the reason. I don't know why it's like this today because I didn't really do any yelling. I watched a lot of different things over the weekend, some of them exciting, some not. But a little bit scratchy, so we'll be playing a little bit hurt today. No pain, just the voice is not cooperating the way I would like it to. Going to spend a lot on the win over Finland 45 years ago today. Al Michaels was on the Rich Eisen show on Friday, and Friday was the day before the 45th anniversary of the upset of the Soviets, and they did a really good job with this. They had Mike Eruzione on, the captain of the team, who scored the game-winning goal against the Russians, and Jim Craig, who literally stood on his head and all these years later is remembered for really one thing. And I remember sitting on my couch in San Antonio watching this on a Sunday morning on this day 45 years ago with tears streaming down my cheeks as he was looking for his father in the stands. His mother had passed away not that long ago, and Craig was looking for his dad in what would be the greatest moment of his life. And it still stands out to me with the flag wrapped around him and him looking up in the stands. He's got the backstory on that, and we'll get to that. But how about that Ovi? Wow.
Didn't think we were going to see the pull to goalie at 3 goals. Chris Knobloch not conceding anything. Okay. Alex Ovechkin on the ice. Well, the game plan for the guys in red is pretty clear, and the chant for Ovi will start here.
All of a sudden, he's got some jump in his legs.
Yes, he does. Connor McDavid still without a shot on goal today with 2:40 to go in the third period. And a puck that comes to Ovechkin. He scores! He did it! He did it! It's a hat trick for Ovechkin. Ty Emberson's stick broke on the center point shot attempt. And Ovechkin with a hat trick. It's 8:82. And the Capitals lead it 7-3. You gotta be here to believe it. Absolutely incredible.
That's John Walton on the Caps Radio Network as Ovechkin is now 12 away from breaking the record, 13, or 12 away from tying, I should say, and 13 away from breaking it. And look, he was probably done a favor there. You don't normally pull a goalie with a 3-goal lead with a little bit of time left on the clock, but okay, so what? You know, if you're going to say this is a tainted record, go away, because it's not. What he's doing is just incredible. That was the 32nd regular season hat trick for Ovechkin. It was also his 200th of the 220s that he's done, only player to score 200 goals in 3 different decades. I mean, just a remarkable career that, you know, frankly, I thought was going to be short. The way he was so reckless when he came up and the way he hit, we'd never seen anybody like this. You know, Gretzky was protected. Gretzky was the greatest player who ever played, but he wasn't playing the game of hockey the way Ovechkin plays it. And to be doing it at this level at the age of 39, And also this interesting juxtaposition. Here we are less than a month removed or about a month removed from, oh, my God, did you just see what the Commanders did? This team predicted to win between 6 and 7 games, and they made it to the NFC Championship game on the back of a rookie, Jaden Daniels. And here's the Caps, who I thought, they're going to have to drag Ovechkin around for a few years to get him the goal record. And in the meantime, he's not only calculating big goals and getting closer to the record, he's doing it in a meaningful way. And as Spencer Carberry points out after the game yesterday, after they won again with their 15th goal of the weekend, they had a big blowout in Pittsburgh on Saturday, winning with 8 goals, and now they total 7 in this one, 7-3. But if you look at the goals that he scored, and they came at a point where the second one was actually a game winner. He scored the first one on a snapshot in the second period, and then a one-timer off a pass from defensive Jacob Chikrin with 10 minutes later in the game, and that proved to be the difference. So as Carberry points out, it's not just the hat trick, it's the type of hat trick that it was.
And the goals he scored tonight were huge goals in the game and had a massive, obviously when you score 3, they have a big impact on the game, but the moments when they were scored, the game was highly competitive, as fast a game as we've played in, given the circumstances, two teams on a back-to-back coming out of the break, but the pace was high, and so the one goal and then to get the power play goal right after that you can feel it, and the guys get fired up on the bench. I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's not that they're dragging Ovechkin along; he's driving them, which is almost hard to believe, and if you did this as a movie, Carberry says
you can't write this stuff. You really could not write a story and a book of what he's doing right now at 39. The goals he's scoring, he could have 6 tonight. Realistically, so on a back-to-back, 39. We flew that, and like I said, massive goals against the Stanley Cup finalists from last year, as good a team as there is in the league. It's just incredible. Yeah,
and I don't know if you followed all this social media stuff on Saturday when they scored 8 goals in Pittsburgh. Some of it was, you had 8 goals, you couldn't get one for number 8? So they more than made up for it yesterday. And here's the projection. It gets earlier and earlier. I was hearing mid-April a couple of weeks ago, if you track this, and who knows what's going to happen, slump, whatever, hopefully not another injury. Remember, all the games he missed with the broken leg, he might have it by now. But at this pace, the record breaker would come on April 4th against the Chicago Blackhawks. That would be really cool. That would be really, really cool to see Wayne Gretzky in the stands and coming out on the ice to congratulate Alex Ovechkin as he breaks his record in a home game against one of the original 6. That would really be awesome. Speaking of awesome, you can probably recite this call in your sleep. It is maybe the most famous call in the history of sports. It happened 45 years ago on Saturday.
11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow up to Schultz. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Al Michaels with the call of his career, the absolute perfect words for the incredible moment when those kids, the youngest team that had ever played Olympic hockey, beat the seasoned professional veteran Soviet team who had hung 10 goals on them a few weeks earlier in an exhibition at Madison Square Garden, and they come from behind to win 4-3 and forever cement themselves in the places of the minds of people who love sports and love incredible moments. But here's the point. If what happens 2 days later doesn't happen, that just goes away. That's just a footnote in history. Like, oh, yeah, a bunch of kids beat the Soviets, but then when it came to the championship game against Finland, they couldn't get it done. And you've heard the Al Michaels call a million times. You probably don't hear this one very often.
Forward to the gold medal. This impossible dream comes true.
Interesting, he didn't use miracle. He used impossible dream. And that comes from Man of La Mancha, to dream the impossible dream. And to think that this hockey team, which at best was going to compete for the bronze medal, they had no shot against the Soviets. And then on a Sunday morning, it's not a big time difference, right? It was in Lake Placid. I was living in the Central Time Zone in San Antonio. And that game, I believe, started at 10 o'clock in the morning Central, so it would have been 11 o'clock in the East. And the feeling that I had on this day 45 years ago, I can still feel it. I can still feel myself sitting on the couch in my apartment, watching on a television set that was huge. My roommate and I dumped a lot of money, $600 into a 26-inch color television. And I'm sitting there watching this again with tears streaming down my face as Jim Craig is looking for his dad. I mean, it's just one of the great moments. And, you know, it would have been, I guess, even greater. Not that you could make this any greater, but you just, more drama maybe if they would have played the Soviets in the championship game. But as the way things worked out, it was in the semifinals, and they go on to play Finland for the gold medal 2 days later in a game that was played in the morning. And, this hockey game for younger people has taken on significance in two ways. One, if you haven't seen it, you should make an effort to do it. I don't know where you can find it. Maybe you can get it on demand. But in 2001, HBO with Ross Greenberg produced a documentary on this. And this was really the first time. It was supposed to come out in 2000, which would have been the 20th anniversary, but they had some delays in putting it together. So it came out in 2001, and it took you a lot behind the scenes and the speech that Herb Brooks gave to his team. There was also a made-for-TV movie several years earlier that might have been around the 10th anniversary with Carl Malden playing Herb Brooks. That didn't work. No. I mean, what happened in 2004 is what I think most people, or younger people for sure, relate to, and that was the movie Miracle with Kurt Russell playing Herb Brooks, and he was, in fact, Herb Brooks. He was cheated out of the Academy Award that year, as far as I'm concerned, because he nailed him. He absolutely nailed Herb Brooks in that movie, and if you watch it, it's, like, I think one of the great sports movies I've ever seen is Hoosiers, but the reality is they took a lot of license with that. I once interviewed Bobby Plump, who was the real life character, who Jimmy Chitwood was based on, and he said the only accurate part of that movie is what happened in the final seconds with that shot. It was Bobby Plump who hit the game-winning shot, but the reality was there was not 6 players on that team. Jimmy Chitwood or Bobby Plump didn't join the team 2 weeks after the season started. Pee Wee didn't knock down a couple of free throws or rattle them in to keep them alive. It was a good team. They had played well the year before. Yeah, they were from a small town, but they were well known, and it really was not a miracle that they had made it. But it was a small town school, and they don't do it that way anymore. The Indiana basketball tournament has changed, and it was sort of David versus Goliath, because they did beat a big city team from Indianapolis, but they took a lot of license with that. And not that takes away from watching the movie. Gene Hackman was great. And when those buses start rolling and the music starts playing, I get choked up. I mean, there's no way around it. And when Gene Hackman says, "My team is on the floor," you get it. But in this one, where they took the movie Miracle, they didn't have to change much at all. And it's a Disney movie, which is often fantasy. But this was one of those cases where the real thing was so good, they didn't have to change it. They didn't have to basically change a word of it. And now we sit here 45 years later, and for people my age and maybe a little bit younger, this is a seminal moment in our lives as sports fans. I can't think of things that would really match that on a national level, or in this case, an international level. Yeah, I was there when Riggins ran the greatest play in team history in the Super Bowl and beating the Dolphins, and that was fabulous. And the Doug Williams second quarter, I was there for that in San Diego, and I saw what they did in winning their third Super Bowl. That was all great. I remember the Bullets winning the championship in 1978. That was fabulous. The Capitals winning the Stanley Cup in 2018 and the Nationals winning the World Series in 2019. Those are all incredible sports moments for me locally, and as fans of all of those teams, it meant a lot. But for the country and for the entire population of the United States, which at the time was going through a crisis of confidence with Jimmy Carter as the president, and gas lines and recession and everything else that was going on in the world, that was really meaningful. And the culmination of that was 45 years ago today. Yes, the moment that everybody remembers was Do You Believe in Miracles 45 years ago Saturday, but today was the day that snapped the lid shut on it. And as a matter of fact, Michael Ruzioni, who was the captain of the team, who scored the game-winning goal, understood the moment so well that with a chance to play in the National Hockey League, he passed it up and has basically lived for the last 45 years being Michael Ruzioni, making appearances, making speeches, writing books. That's what he does. That business is good. And he didn't want to smudge it in any way with maybe a mediocre hockey career. And that's how big that was. And then later that day, because that was the final event, or one of the final events of that Olympics, and later that day they had the gold medal ceremony, and Michael Ruzioni was sent up to get the medal and invited the whole team onto the stage. Just unbelievable memories. And we'll get to the inside story on that as Al Michaels described it on the Rich Eisen Show with Michael Ruzioni and with Jim Craig. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Hey, if you're just jumping in your car, we spent some time on this in the first few minutes of the show. Everybody knows the Al Michaels call, Do You Believe in Miracles? Yes, as the U.S. upset the Soviet Union 45 years ago on Saturday. But how many times have you heard this?
Forward to the gold medal. This impossible dream comes true.
That was 45 years ago today, and that's what made the Miracle on Ice as significant as it remains 45 years later. Al Michaels has been showing up on the Rich Eisen Show for the anniversary of this on a fairly regular basis. They did the 40th, they did the 42nd, and Friday was the day before the 45th of the Soviet upset. And they told some great stories. And they had Michael Ruzioni, the captain of the team, plus Jim Craig, the goalie. They both made appearances, and I pulled some of the highlights of that. And I'll start with this. These are great stories, behind-the-scenes stories. Al was doing only his second hockey game. He'd done a hockey game some years earlier, and because of the others on the staff, like Frank Gifford, former football player, and Howard Cosell, they didn't have an announcer with any experience doing hockey. There was no Doc Emmerich around at the time. So, by way of process of elimination, oh, Al, you grew up in New York, you know hockey, you did a hockey game before, you're going to do it. He was also working with a rookie announcer. Ken Dryden had been the best goalie in the NHL. He left the game in his prime at the age of 31, having won 4 straight Vezina trophies as the best goalie in the game for the Montreal Canadiens. But he had other things he wanted to do in his life, and he left at a time when he felt like he'd fulfilled all of his hockey dreams and wanted to move on. So he, choosing what was next, went to law school, and he'd done some of that when he was a player. And number 2, he was interested in getting in television. So he was hired by ABC to work with this very green hockey announcer and Al Michaels, and he was obviously an expert on hockey, but very green at doing television. And the two of them, produced magic for us with, again, the call that stands up for all time, Do You Believe in Miracles? But this was a story of what happened the day before the game against the Soviets and how Ken Dryden spent the day. Here's Al.
So the day before, I'm just preparing for the Friday game against the Soviets. My partner, Ken Dryden, after they had played, the United States had beaten West Germany on Wednesday night, got into a car, was driven overnight to Ottawa to take the bar exam, which he not only passed, but I believe he had the highest score of that bar exam, got in a car and came back. I've always said Ken is about as smart a man as I've ever met, a true Renaissance man, a man who, had he desired to become the Prime Minister of Canada, probably could have. He did serve in the parliament for a while, but then decided he wanted to do other things. He passed the bar exam with flying colors. So that's what he did the day before the game, and I'm sitting in my room just learning how to pronounce every Soviet player's name.
The polysyllabic test you were taking there.
The great thing is almost every one of them ends with "ov." Fetisov, Makarov, the whole thing, Krutov. Perfect.
There was that benefit of that for sure, and then of course the game itself. What was it like the day leading up to the convening inside the arena for that big game against the Russians?
I mean, so much anticipation, but the game was going to start at 5 o'clock. Mm-hmm. The way it worked out, you didn't know who was going to play who until the early round was completed, at which point the U.S. finished second in its bracket and the Soviets were first. So 2 in the U.S. bracket wound up playing 1. So people who bought the 8 o'clock ticket, they didn't know what game they were going to get. They got Sweden, Finland. Oh. If you had the 5 o'clock ticket at $69.20 face price, you got the U.S. against the Soviet Union. And that's why the game wound up on tape delay, because ABC tried like crazy to get them to move that game to 8 o'clock. But the Soviet Federation basically said, no dice.
Niet
with a lot of exclamation points. And, we weren't the friendliest with the Soviet Union at that time, which, of course, played into what made that game so special. So I walked over to the arena with Ken Dryden at about 1:30. We were staying at the Hilton Hotel, which is like 3 or 4 blocks away. And I remember one part of the conversation with Ken was, if the U.S. only trails something like 3-1 in the middle of the second period, that's about all we could hope for. Because what we feared, certainly I feared, was the Soviets would lead 6-0, 14 minutes to go in the second period, and everybody's gone. And knowing Rune Arledge at that time, who was running ABC Sports, he probably would have put on figure skating ordinals or something, anything to get away from that game. So this was what we were hoping for. And, of course, as the game evolved, and it was only 3-2 at the end of the second period, we hit a grand slam home run. It was a close game after 2 periods. And you and I have talked about this in the past, but there were so many interesting and fascinating things about that game. The Soviets, number one, outshot the United States 39-16, 2.5-to-1 ratio. They outshot the U.S. 15-3 in the second period. They dominated the time of in the offensive zone for the Soviets was 2 or 3 times what it was in the U.S. zone. The U.S. came from behind 3 times, down 1-0, 2-1, 3-2, and of course take the lead on Mark Johnson's tying goal and Eruzione's game winner. So how often will you see a game? It's almost never where a team gets outshot 2.5-to-1 and comes from behind 3 times. It almost never happens. It happened that night.
Yeah, and here's something else. Because it was a 5 o'clock game and the way this all rolled out at a time before social media, yes, we had radio who could give this out, but they weren't going to break into television. They sainted nightly news. You're not going to cut in on that to tell people what happened. And so there were a lot of people who watched the game on tape delay, and that's another part of the story that Al and Dryden had to stay there and do the second game live just in case the tape broke. Think of the technology then. The tape broke during the rebroadcast of the game, or actually the broadcast, because it wasn't broadcast live in the United States. If you walk around and tell people, yeah, watch that game live, no, you didn't, because ABC didn't do it. They weren't going to cut out their programming. They could only make the window for 9 at night for 8 o'clock. And so I wasn't here. I was in San Antonio, but I'm told that Rene Poussaint, who was working at Channel 7 then, one of the newscasters there, they did little teases during nighttime programming. They said, and the Americans get a big upset. A lot of people didn't know that. There were people who did, thanks to radio. There's stories of people stopping on the Beltway and flashing their lights and yelling, they did it, they did it, they did it. But a lot of America didn't know. News didn't travel the way it does today. So 45 years ago, some people did watch tape delay thinking they were watching it live. But what happened on Sunday was live. It was broadcast live on ABC, and people got to see it. More memories of this. Jim Craig, the goalie, again, the moment I'll never forget, looking for his father in the stands and the American flag draped around his shoulders, what that meant after they beat Finland. Craig was on with the show, with the Rich Eisen show on Friday, joining Al and Rich, and had his memories of how he prepared to play in that Soviet game 45 years ago Saturday.
Everybody prepares to win, or they think they do. But with our coach, he was the most organized person there was. And so in order to prepare to win, you have to get organized. And, I think one of the biggest and smartest things that he did was have us play the Russians in Madison Square Garden so that we became more prepared. So when we woke up that morning, we had done the work, we were prepared. And it was really about executing. Now, just because you're organized, prepared, and you execute doesn't mean you're going to win. But, I think the biggest focus was how are we going to represent our country and do the very best job we could be. And for me, playing the Russians was like, in one period, was like a game against anybody else. So, you try to compartmentalize and have really strategic times. And Al, as you know, in sports, goalies have to make the save at the right time. So you watched that game last night. The Canadian goalie, if he didn't make any saves, he made them all at the right time, in overtime. And so timing has so much to do with it. So being prepared, enjoying the moment, probably the most important thing.
You were able to live in the moment, Jim? You were able to soak it in while you're doing this?
Yeah, I mean, you get to play against the greatest team in the world, and you're representing your country, and it's a really good test to find out where you're going to be. And I always tell people you have to have more goals. Most people, when they get somewhere, they think they're done. And to me, when you finally make it somewhere, you're just starting. You know what I mean? And so this was a real good litmus test.
And Rich, don't forget, one of the most iconic post-game camera shots ever taken was Jim Craig, whose mom had died shortly before. Where's my father? Where's my father? You could read his lips. What a moment, Jim. What a moment that was.
Yeah, Al, one of the things, and you and I have talked about this, is if you can change your mindset from sacrifices and look at them as opportunities where someone else has made sacrifices for you, then comes a responsibility. So it was really easy for me to think about my father and all the sacrifices that not only my family did, but, community and coaches. And that can be used as a motivator. And I think that's really kind of something that I've been very fortunate enough to use as a tool of motivation.
Would you mind sharing with us what happened when you did find your dad?
Well, first, he used to be right behind the goal, and I used to love the end that didn't have the ice machine because there was more people there and you had more pressure. And he used to always sit up there. So I'd have to acknowledge him, you know what I mean? Because, hi, Dad, okay, time to go to work, right? And so, earlier in his life, he had a heart attack, right? A pretty bad one. And so when the game ends, he's not where he should be. And I found out that ABC had moved him to a better spot. And so I'm trying to find him and making sure he's okay. But the moment was really about both of us thinking of his wife and my mother and, wishing that she would be able to be physically with us there. And it was more out of a respect, so when I found him, he knew what I was thinking, right? And I was really happy to see him.
All right, that's incredible. The last part I'm going to play was with Mike Eruzione. And Mike Eruzione has, again, lived off being Mike Eruzione for the last 45 years. He has made speeches, appearances. He even talked about the gear. Now, he's kept some things, obviously, from that, the gold medal, the ring he won, his jersey, but he sold his shoulder pads and his pants, and I think one of the sticks that he used, he kept the stick where he scored the game-winning goal, but a lot of the memorabilia was sold so he could use it for his family. He helped his kids buy houses. They have 3 kids, and he's been able to make a very nice living being Mike Eruzione, who had his basically 2 weeks in the sun, or certainly the moment in the sun where he scores the game-winning goal against the Russians, and that's what people will always remember him for. But he's a very well thought out guy. He's had a lot of time to tell and retell the story, and he's got the tales down very well. So this was the Mike Eruzione appearance as Al Michaels and Rich Eisen reminisced on the 45th anniversary of the gold medal for the U.S. hockey team. It happened 45 years ago today. Here's Al and Eruzione.
Herb Brooks basically telling the team in the locker room at the end of the second period, after they're trailing 2-1, if you lose this game, you're going to take it to your bleeping grave. And there's no question about that. If this team would have lost the Finland game, people would have said, let me get this straight. You beat the vaunted Soviet Union and you lost to Finland? Because on the reverse side of that would be like somebody from the Soviets. And in fact, I had the opportunity at the 2014 Olympics to interview Tretiak, the goalie who was pulled after the first period in that game, and then Michigan comes in, and they got, because Mark Johnson had scored at the buzzer at the end of the first period. So they take Tretiak, maybe the best goalie in the history of hockey. They take him out, and I asked him, what did people say to you guys when you got back to the Soviet Union? And he said, we'd walk around and people would say, you lost to a bunch of students? And the other thing he said to me was, I said to him, what did you think? Because they just won all the time. They won so much that Mike and I were talking the other day, at the end of the one goal victory that the U.S. had against the Soviets, they didn't even pull the goalie because they probably never practiced it. They were always winning. They didn't have to think about pulling the goalie for the extra skater. And Tretiak told me, when I said, what were you guys thinking? You're standing there pensively on the blue line. You're watching this crazy celebration. And he said to me, we wished we were them. Perfect.
What do you think about when you hear that, Mike?
I think it's great. No, but I think there was almost kind of not a relief, but they enjoyed watching us celebrate to a degree, because they never shared that. You never saw any emotion out of them. They were expected to win. That was their job. They worked. They were in the military. Some of these guys were going for their third gold medal. That's 12 years playing together. So for them to get beat like that, it was almost like, oh my God, I guess this is a celebration that we don't do that often, and maybe in some ways enjoyed watching us just share that victory amongst all of us and the crowd.
So why do you think it worked for you guys, Mike? Like, why do you think this moment in time actually occurred all these years later now?
From the teams of winning the tournament, I think Dave Silk said it pretty well the other day when we were doing something. He said for a 2-week period of time, 20 players collectively played their best hockey they've ever played, individually and yet collectively. And I thought that was a pretty good point, because I never really thought about that. But I've always said, if it wasn't for Mark Johnson, we don't win. Mark was the man. He when we needed a goal, it would be like, hey, Magic, time to do something. But we played 4 lines constantly. We didn't shy away from playing everybody. Jimmy was great in the goal. And the one thing that I remember and is I scored with 10 minutes left to go in the game. And I think, if I remember correctly, the Soviets only had 5 or 6 shots on goal in the last 10 minutes. They had like 30-something in the first 2 periods and a half. But in the last 10 minutes, we did a really good job of shutting them down. And I think that goes back to Herb as a coach. So everything worked. We clearly had some good players. We didn't suck. Kenny Morrow went on and won 4 Stanley Cups. Davey Christian, Mike Ramsey, and Neil Broughton played 17, 18 years in the National Hockey League. So we had some really good young players, but collectively we had the right players. And with Herb's leadership and the way he played us and how we played was a huge part of our success. And I'm going to give you a statistic, and I don't know if Al, if you even know this, and Robbie McClanahan gave this to me. In the third period of the Olympics, we outscored our opponents 15-3. That's an unbelievable number. And that goes back to the conditioning and the skating and the Herbies and everything that we had done to go out there and win. And Al mentioned it. We were losing to Sweden, we tied. We were losing to the Czechs, we won. We were losing to Norway, we came back. We were losing to West Germany by 2 goals, we came back. We were losing to the Soviets throughout the game, we came back. We were losing to Finland going into the third, we came back. That's a sign of a good hockey team. And that's a sign of, guys, and I talk about it all the time, who had incredible values, incredible work ethic. Herb used to call us a lunch pail, hard hat group of guys, because that's what we were. We were an old-fashioned group of guys who believed in hard work. We believed in togetherness. And when you put all that together, usually good things happen. And I think, again, that's the side of our team that you don't measure. You don't see that. You don't measure heart and pride and commitment and the values that are important that our team had to go along with some pretty good hockey players. And so, again, having said all that, you just put that all together over a 2-week period of time. I think that's how we were able to win.
That's Michael Ruzioni with Al Michaels and Rich Eisen recalling 45 years ago today when the U.S. won the gold medal, coming from behind as they had the entire tournament. They were behind after the second period, where Herb Brooks famously said to his team, if you don't win this game, you'll take it to your grave, your effing grave. And they did. They came back and they won, and they won 4-2. So it was a fairly comfortable margin, but down 2-1, needing to score in the third period, and they did 3 times to wrap it up. Just unbelievable. And he talks about 2 things: the Herbies. That's the famous scene in the movie Miracle, where they're on the ice. It's late at night. They even turn off the lights in the arena. And Kurt Russell nailing Herb Brooks, blowing his whistle again, back and forth. And the other part that he said, where he said that they had the right players. That's another great scene in the movie, where they have a 3-day tryout for all these college kids. There were a couple who had a little bit of minor league experience, but again, in those days, you couldn't be a professional to play in the Olympics. And they had this 3-day open tryout. I think it was Colorado Springs. And after the first day, Kurt Russell says to his assistant, Noah Wiley, who you saw in the movie, the TV show The Americans, as the assistant coach. The first day, he goes, "Here's my team." And he says, "Well, wait a minute. This is a 3-day tryout. You know the best players after 1 day?" He says, "I don't want the best players. I want the right players." Amazing. Just amazing. So we talked about, how they had come from behind once again against Finland. They're down 2-1 after the end of the second period. They had been down in most of their games. And the stat that you may have just heard from Michael Ruzioni, that in the third period of all of their Olympic hockey games, they outscored the opponents 15-3, meaning they were clearly in better shape and ready in those big moments to deliver, none bigger than what Ruzioni did in scoring the game-winning goal against the Soviets. But when it was finally over, when it was all over, after they had completed the run and beaten Finland 4-2 for the gold medal, Jim McKay, who was as good a studio host as we've ever seen, he had more famously in 1972 in talking about the hostages that were killed, the 9 hostages, saying they're gone, they're all gone, is remembered forever. And the coverage that he did of what was breaking news, not sports, but breaking news, was phenomenal. And it was up to him to put the final words to this as they threw to the studio. And even as great as he was, is having the right words for the right moment, even he struggled to find them after what he had seen from the U.S. Olympic team over this 2-week period.
I've been covering sports since 1948 on television. It's almost 32 years, and this is it. This is the greatest moment I have ever seen, the most emotion, the most excitement, the greatest achievement on the part of a single group of young men. The bands are playing, they're going to be, look at the snowing, being blown around. It's a scene that I think all of us will literally remember for the rest of our lives, when the kids from the colleges of the United States beat first the greatest team in the world and then got up early one Sunday morning in the Adirondack State Park and won the gold medal. It's a greater achievement than, as I say, anything I can think of that I have ever seen in the field of sport. This afternoon, the Soviets and the Swedes will be playing for the silver medal. It's all over. As far as the gold is concerned, the United States has won it. Rune Arledge, who's in here at the whole games, will really be shocked at this. I can't think of another thing to say. Back to you, Al.
Yeah, later that day, Soviet Union beat Sweden 9-2. You think they were frustrated over losing to the Americans? You better believe they were. 9-2, the final score. Beyond the sports end of this is what this meant to the country, and you have to realize where we were in 1980. We had the hostages in Iran, and that would not be settled for a year. We had a recession. We had gas prices going through the roof, and you couldn't get gas. People were buying diesel-fueled cars. Later that year, the Cold War was at a point where Carter pulled out of the Summer Olympics, the boycott of 1980. I mean, things were not in a good place in this country. And Jimmy Carter, who was going to run for re-election, it would be a landslide victory for Ronald Reagan, but trying to buoy the spirits of the country, obviously wanted to get in on this. So just after the U.S. won, he put in a call to the locker room. Fritz Mondale was there. The vice president of the United States was there. He was from Minnesota, where Herb Brooks was from. They knew each other. But Carter was in the White House, and as was the tradition with many big events, the president called the coach, Herb Brooks, and this was Jimmy Carter talking to the real Herb Brooks, not the one that Kurt Russell played so well in the movie.
Yes, sir.
Herb, you told me last night you had one more to win, and you really came through.
But, Mr. President, I lie a lot, and I didn't think, I didn't know if we were going to do it. By the way, it was a great win, for everybody in sport and the American people in general, because of the, things we had to overcome from different beliefs, ways of life, whatever. And I think it just proves that our way of life is the proper way to continue on.
Well, I just want to let you know again that everybody in our country is proud, was watching it. We were trying to do business, but nobody could do it because we were watching the TV with one eye and working on Iran and economics with the other.
But I think that the latter of the two are far more important. Athletics are important, but problems are more so. We're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
I look forward to it. You wouldn't accept my invitation last night until you won the gold medal, but we're looking forward to tomorrow. Amy was there this afternoon also.
Yeah, I understand.
And we'll be seeing you tomorrow, and tell the whole team that we're extremely proud of them. They've come through like true champions. And I think all of your opponents did a fine job, too. But we're so proud.
That's Jimmy Carter and Herb Brooks 45 years ago today after the U.S. Wrapped up the gold medal at the Olympics in 1980. And I don't know if I'll still be doing radio in 5 years, but it'd be so cool to talk about the 50th anniversary. Not that any anniversary isn't special, but this one very well celebrated, I thought, on the Rich Eisen Show. And I wanted to play some of that and look back on this day. Here's another anniversary story, and it's really bizarre if you think about this. 40 years ago yesterday, Bobby Knight threw a chair. This was an Indiana-Purdue game, February 23rd of 1985. And, nowadays, Bobby Knight throws a chair. You got to think about firing him. Certainly suspending him for more than, I think, one game is all he got. It spawned the book Season on the Brink because a young John Feinstein, who was covering basketball for the Washington Post, was watching this game on television. And it got the wheels spinning, and he had known Knight. He'd covered, college basketball for a number of years, and he came up with the idea based on the great David Halberstam book, which is what is it? The Breaks of the Game. Yeah, The Breaks of the Game, where he followed the Portland Trailblazers for an entire season when they were defending champions, 1977 to 78, going behind the scenes, practice, games, locker room, all that stuff. Gave you unprecedented access to that team. So Feinstein wanted to write the same kind of book on Indiana, which he did in 1987, and I think it became the number one sports book of all time. It was on the bestseller list for months and months. That was a career changer for John, obviously, and in many ways, kind of changed the way that sports books were written and access that you have. I just watched a series on Netflix about the Olympic basketball team this past year, so those things changed, but. That was an ugly incident. That was a petulant move by a very, a great coach, obviously, complicated man. But I don't think it's something you celebrate. Well, people wondered what happened to the chair, and there have been stories written about it. Where was the chair? Well, yesterday, Indiana played Purdue on the 40th anniversary of the chair throw, And Mike Woodson, the outgoing coach at Indiana, who played for Knight, though he had left, he had graduated before that game was played in '85, he went to great lengths to get the actual chair. And for that game, I mean, again, to me, it seems like an embarrassing incident. But I guess in basketball-crazed Indiana, where my son went to school and still loves Indiana basketball, and where on the Jumbotron before the games they show Knight throwing the chair, somehow this was celebrated. So Woodson, in talking about the victory yesterday, that was a big win for Indiana. That might put them back in the NCAA tournament picture. They beat Purdue by 15 points, 73-58. And Woodson talked about the tennis coach at Indiana who understood what that chair would mean. He took pictures with it. He had it documented that was the real chair. His name was Scott Greer. He passed away a couple of years ago. And the chair got back in the possession of Mike Woodson, and he sat on the chair in the victory. Now, probably that's, going to be a good luck charm for him. So in other games that they play in Bloomington, he'll be sitting in that chair. But it's an embarrassing incident. I don't think it's something that you should be proud of, right? I mean, do you take like the headset that Woody Hayes wore when he punched Charlie Bauman in a bowl game against Clemson, which ended his career? Do you celebrate the headset that he had and have other coaches wear it? Not that the technology is in use anymore, but it just seems odd. It doesn't seem like that's something that anybody should be proud of. Yeah, Bobby Knight threw a chair. That's awful. How can you do that? But Knight was, such an icon at that point. He'd won 2 championships and would go on to win another one. So, Indiana wasn't going to mess with him. He had good teams every year. And the chair was preserved thanks to the tennis coach, Scott Greer. And Mike Woodson, who will coach only the rest of his season and then leave basketball, I assume that's the end of his coaching career, is actually celebrating that. I mean, it's bizarre, right? It is bizarre. Look, nobody celebrates history more than I do. But to think that you took something that should be an embarrassing incident for Indiana and somehow made it nostalgic. I know Knight's gone now, but doesn't seem like the celebration fits the incident if you see it that way. All right, coming up, a little baseball. Tony and Mike on Justin Verlander's conversation with Bob Nightingale of USA Today and the state of pitching these days. And Verlander, who I believe is 32, I think he's 32 or 33 wins away from 300, thinking he might be able to do it in an era where pitchers don't rack up that many wins anymore because they don't pitch long enough to do it. But Verlander had some really interesting thoughts on it, and Tony and Mike picked them apart on PTI. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
This is not a political statement here. This is just an observation given the climate of the way things are. In case you're not aware, in the last, 12 hours or so, Jeffrey Lurie, the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, put out a statement, as a team, we are declining the White House visit. And I would think that it might be in the best interest of the White House to put out a statement that says something to the effect of, we are not going to do any team celebrations at the White House anymore. We have decided that that's not something we're going to do for whatever reason you want to give. But if they're going to continue to invite teams where I'm sure there may be some whose politics are aligned with Trump that would want to go, but there probably are enough on the team that they wouldn't want to go. And if you invite a team of football players with practice squad and coaches and everything, you're talking about a traveling party of about 100 people. For a football team, would you want like 12 of them to show up? No, I don't think you would. I can't imagine an NBA team doing this. I can't imagine a hockey team, although, many of them are, with what's happening with Canada, I can't imagine that a group of Canadians would want to visit the White House. So, yeah, I think they need to put out a statement. Now, they may be able to invite individuals. I think he showed up at the Daytona 500 and drove his limousine around the track and got some cheering in that. And I guess that I was watching when that was happening, and the broadcast crew said some good things about him. But I would think that would be the best thing to do to get ahead of this. You don't want to continue to invite teams to show up and have them all turn you down. Maybe there'll be one that'll show up. I don't know. Maybe a college team. I can't imagine that happening. But Jeffrey Lurie coming out and saying we're not showing up. That's not really a good look for the White House. All right, baseball. Got the Nats. Nats playing. They had a big run game over the weekend against the Mets, or maybe it was the Astros. What do you know from spring training? It's hard to tell. But this has been a front burner topic for quite a while now, and they have made some really good changes to baseball. I think the limited number of pickoff attempts has helped. Obviously, the pitch clock has made a huge difference. The shift, I think, banning the shift has made a difference there. I don't think what Rob Manfred suggested several months ago is going to get any traction. That seems really stupid. The golden at bat, like you could conceivably take a guy off second base, have him come up and hit in a certain circumstance, but they're thinking in different ways. And there are some things that maybe you want to go back to the way they used to be. They have one thing for pitching that you have to face 3 batters. Now, that doesn't seem to have made a hell of a lot of difference. And for starters, Davey Martinez said this last week, and he's not wrong in saying it. It's just the thinking of the way pitching works these days. And he said the goal is 21 outs. Well, that's 7 innings. If a pitcher, when I was growing up, came out after 7 innings, he was either hurt or his team was so far behind that they wanted to stop the bleeding and bring in a reliever and hopefully come back with some runs. Nowadays, the goal is to pitch 7 innings. That's it, 21 outs. And if you're pitching great and somehow you're below 100 pitches, and this happens very, very rarely now, then you'll have an opportunity to finish the game. But once you start flirting with 100, they usually don't let you go past that. Sometimes you get to maybe 104, 105 if you're in the 9th inning. But complete games are completely out the window. And most of the time now, 5, you're good. You pitch 5, that's enough. Too many pitches. You're getting too close to 100. We want to take you out. Well, Justin Verlander is old school. He's been around. He's in his 40s. And he gave an interview to Bob Nightingale of USA Today last week where he talked about the state of pitching and said, we shouldn't be doing this. This is not the way the game was intended. And Tony and Mike, old school guys, and you've heard Wilbon rant for years about the state of pitching. They tackled this and discussed what Verlander said to Nightingale.
Among the things Verlander said was that he very much wants to win the 38 more games he needs to get to 300 wins. Everything else he said comes straight out of the Mike Wilbon handbook. Verlander said analytics is to blame for the demise of the starting pitcher. He stumps for renewed value on starting pitchers winning games, and he wants rule changes to ensure that starting pitchers go deep into games. Verlander said, this is a quote, "We used to make fun of guys going 5 and fly. Now it's the standard," unquote. Wilbon, what are the chances baseball will listen to Verlander?
God bless Justin Verlander. Tony, I'm a cynic about this. I think baseball is the most reduced sport of all relative to what it was 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 70 years ago. I just think baseball is just regressed. And the biggest part of it, the single largest part, is what has happened, the extinction of the starting pitcher. And baseball's attitude, let's just have a bullpen day during the World Series, in which case I go to Law and Order SVU. So
right.
God bless Justin Verlander for giving voice to this. A guy who's out there in the trenches. He has been a big star. He's pitched in multiple markets. He's been in the game long enough, and he came in at a point where people still completed games. 28 complete games last year. Talk about the NBA being embarrassed over the All-Star game. Major League Baseball ought to be embarrassed. But, Tony, I don't think we're there yet. I don't. I worry that Justin Verlander's voice is just like a call in the wilderness, and there's not a chorus. He needs a chorus behind him, like Sunday morning in a Baptist church, and I worry he doesn't have enough amens.
So Verlander has been a guest on this high-quality program several times. He is a great guest.
Yes,
I find myself agreeing with virtually everything that he says. I don't know in this moment
When he looks at the world of pitching, I don't know how much of that is from the narrow prism of a guy trying to get to 300 wins, but I think we both agree if he gets to 300 wins, he'll be the last guy to ever do it because pitchers don't get enough starts and managers don't leave them in long enough to hang around. Now, I don't believe that managers don't want their starting pitchers to win. I think they do want them to win. But they've found another path to winning, or sometimes the GM calls and says, too many pitches, get them out of here.
Yeah.
Okay? So, okay. Now, I don't want to just slam analytics, Mike, because I think analytics are a tool you use to get better. I don't think they're handcuffs. And Justin Verlander, when he went to Houston, praised the analytics in Houston. But having said that, I want to see pitchers go 7, 8, and 9. And let me say this to you, Mike, that if we know Rob Manfred for anything, he's willing to tinker with the game to make it better. Yeah. It's Rob Manfred's pitch clock. It's Rob Manfred's no defensive shifts in the infield. It's Rob Manfred, universal DH. It's Rob Manfred, ghost runner. He's like the Wizard of Oz there. So I am hopeful. I am more hopeful than you are.
Good.
I am.
Spread the gospel. You and Justin Verlander spread it, because I don't know that baseball's invested. I don't know that baseball sees itself looking over the cliff just yet. They pull themselves back by shortening the game to 2.5 hours from 3:00, whatever it is. But I don't think they see this, Tony, as anything that's going to necessarily enhance it. Maybe Manfred does. Maybe with Theo pushing him in the back, he'll get there. One can hope.
Well, here's the problem here. It's not just the pitchers at the major league level. It's the pitchers and how they're raised. And they're raised, trained to throw as hard as they can for as long as they can. And then they'll throw another arm in there. And the pitchers don't really know how to pitch. And they said one of the worst things that's happened to pitching, you might say it's the best thing because it extends careers. But the Tommy John surgery has proven to be, or I don't know, proven is the right word, but it's influenced the way that pitchers pitch. Like, there's no downside really to blowing out your elbow, because they can just take you over and stitch it up with a new ligament from the other elbow, and you continue to pitch. And this is now where it's 51 years since Tommy John had his surgery, and now you're talking about high school kids getting it all the time, college. Sometimes when they get to the major leagues, they've had the Tommy John, and you can have it a couple of times. Shohei Ohtani is supposed to pitch this year after his second Tommy John. It's standard procedure. So, that's not going to change. You obviously want to keep the Tommy John for those who do blow out their elbows, but you got to find a way to make pitching more like pitching used to be. And there was a suggestion not long ago. I remember we had Tim Kirchin on here, and he basically said that's ridiculous, but it might be something that they consider, is if you throw the ball over 95 miles an hour, it's a ball, right? We're already working with like a Quest Tech type of thing where they can tell now it's being used in spring training where you can challenge pitches. They have a way of knowing. They'll know. The gun always tells you how fast it is. I don't think that's going to happen, but they got to find some way, because he's right. The state of pitching is not good now. And when I was growing up, they were the biggest stars in baseball. Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale. Those are superstars. They were the most valuable players on the baseball. They were to baseball kind of what quarterbacks are to football now. You got a great starting pitcher. You got a team. Now, there was even this crazy one, which happened in 73, I believe. Steve Carlton with the Phillies, they won 54 games, and he won 27 of them. That'll never happen again. But, yeah, I mean, the devaluation of pitching and the way pitching is handled has hurt the game. It has. And whatever Theo Epstein or the other think tank people are going to come up with on baseball, it is something that I think they have to address. Yeah, Justin Verlander has some self-interest in mind. He wants those 38 wins, but I don't know if he's going to get them. Tommy John, I think, came up like 20-some wins short of 300. He's not getting in. It's crazy. But that's, his win percentage not the same, and he was a sinker ball pitcher and all that. But yeah, it's really changed the way the game is played. There's a new book coming out, which it was not a book review in the Post, but on the opinion page, about how important Earl Weaver was in the race barrier in baseball. Now, by the time Earl Weaver got to the major leagues as a manager. That was 20 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color line. So it wasn't like, he was a trailblazer. But the way he had a team that was led by a black man in Frank Robinson was somewhat groundbreaking, and it's part of a new book that's out, written by John W. Miller. That's not the John Miller who does the Giants games on the radio and for many years did baseball on ESPN. It's called The Last Manager, How Earl Weaver Tricked, Tormented, and Reinvented Baseball. And, God, it's been almost 40 years since Earl managed. He retired the first time after the 1982 season, which proved to be a year early because Joe Altobelli, with basically his team, went on to win the World Series in 83. And then when Altobelli began to falter in 1985, as the story goes, Edward Bennett Williams owned the Orioles, and Earl happened to be in town driving the Winnebago that he'd driven up from Florida, where he was now living. This is, again, 1985, 3 years after he retired. And he's visiting his daughter. And EBW gets word that Earl's in town. He invites him to lunch and asks him if he wants to manage again. And sure enough, I was at the game where he came back. Earl had to go to a sporting goods store to find some cleats. And he came out on the field and returned as manager in 1985. But by the end of the 86 season, he'd had enough. So it's been almost 40 years since he managed. And people who are younger will not remember him, but what an important figure he was in the game of baseball and the great teams that he had, starting with the team in 69, which was famously upset by the Mets in the World Series, but they won 110 games that year. They went back in 1970, and they won. And then in 71, they lost in 7 games to the Pirates. They got back to the World Series. 1979, lost to the Pirates again. But they were in the playoffs every year. I mean, they were a great team throughout the 70s and into the early 80s before, things started to tail off. And by 88, they had that 0-21 start. But what Earl did, not just as an on-field manager, but what he did to advance the game of baseball at a time when it was, it was white, but kind of ironically, baseball hit a high watermark with African Americans in the 1970s. In 1968, 15% of big leaguers were black, up from 0 in 46 and 9% in 1960. It would top out at 18% from 1975 to 1986. Yeah, when I was growing up, the biggest stars in baseball were black. Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Bob Gibson. They were African Americans who had grown up playing baseball. Gibson played basketball in college at Creighton. But baseball was what he did, and he did it as well as anyone, a Hall of Fame pitcher. Willie Mays had grown up in Alabama playing baseball. He was a Negro League player when he was 17 years old. Hank Aaron, I think, played in the early days of the Negro Leagues and then made it to the major leagues. So they were part of the wave of African Americans who finally got their chance, thanks to Jackie Robinson. But Earl's an interesting story. Born in 1930. All-white neighborhood in St. Louis, attended segregated games at Sportsman Park, according to an excerpt from this book. When he was a young man, racial slurs such as the N-word were part of his vocabulary. So that's how he grew up. But as he was going through life, and he came up through the minor leagues, never made it to the major leagues, he came to understand, quote, I had little experience with black people and none with Hispanics, yet I had no problem discovering that some of the people were very good people, whether they attended your church or voted for your candidate or dressed to your style or danced to your music. Baseball gave me the opportunity to open my mind. And his greatest player in his run as manager of the Orioles was Frank Robinson, who was also the leader of that team and went on to a great managerial career. And even though he came to the Orioles in the 1960s in a Northeast city that you would think would be more open-minded, there was a famous incident where he and his wife showed up to rent an apartment, and they were turned down because the landlord thought that the person from the Orioles with the last name Robinson who wanted to rent the apartment was Brooks Robinson, who was white. And as a matter of fact, with the help of the Orioles front office, the Robinsons found a home to rent that was owned by a black Baltimore Colts player. By the time Weaver got to the Orioles, Robinson had talked for years of becoming the first black manager, and it was Earl that gave him the push for that. Frustrated by injury and poor performance, Robinson was in a funk during the 67 season and into 1968. Weaver had been managing the Crabbers in the Puerto Rican Winter League, but he quit when he got the Orioles job. He lobbied the Crabbers management to hire Frank as the manager for the 68-69 winter season. It was a pivotal move. Robinson resumed his slugging and managed the team for 3 seasons in the Winter League. And then when he was coming to the end of his career, he was a player manager. He was the first black manager in the history of baseball in 1975 when he took over the Cleveland Indians and was actually hit a home run in his first game, but became a full-time manager by 76 and managed 17 years in the majors and was part of the team that came here from Montreal in 2005, was a great manager, a highly respected man when he was with the Nationals. And while he did not have the success as a manager that Earl had, he managed for a long time and did win Manager of the Year for leading the Orioles to a second-place finish in 1989 after they'd started off 0-21. He had taken over for Cal Ripken Sr., I think it was like 7 games into that season, and they had a miserable year, but brought him back. He was a great man, great manager, and I did not know about the connection of Earl and how much he helped him. And because Earl was an irascible guy, he was a guy that was, smoking in the dugout. He had argued with umpires. He had a famous crazy relationship with Jim Palmer, where they were sometimes at each other's throats, but respected each other and for what they could do. So that looks like a book I'd like to read. A book about Earl Weaver that's soon to come out. That's it for me. Bram is coming up next. I will see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.